You are watching Winnipeg Alternative Media, Prairie Truth. Hi everybody, Todd McDougall here from Winnipeg Alternative Media. Over recent months, NASA has admitted, finally, that anything to do with the receding of the polar ice caps, all satellite imagery, all data over the past 30 plus years has been inaccurate. And for the most part, of course, has been falsified and a hoax. The polar ice caps, neither the North or South Pole, is receding. It never has been in any one major way. In fact, what it does do is it shrinks and grows, contracts and expands, contracts and expands. Over the past recent years, it has actually expanded a lot more than it has shrunk just prior. So to build on this, we're going to take a look at some of the other things that has happened ever since the gigantic conversation, starting with things like Al Gore and An Inconvenient Truth, and then all of the United Nations and the IPCC all talking about and warning everybody about the dire need to stop global warming, anthropogenic global warming. So over the past decade plus, since this conversation, this gigantic debate, has built itself up into what has been called by many from around all different fields of science as a new religion of science, which funny enough now is found to be completely and entirely false. This anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming caused by, car emissions, factories and such, putting up too much CO2 that is going up into the upper atmosphere, is going to basically melt or burn a hole in the ozone layer, which is going to allow far more of the sun's radiation and far more of the sun's heat into our lower atmosphere, then melting polar ice caps, causing water levels of all the oceans to rise, drastically changing weather, etc., etc., etc. All kinds of things that in many ways we haven't really seen into any of the kinds of extents that we have been warned about ever since this conversation started 15 odd years ago. So, some of the things that we can quickly add into this conversation that just build up the proof and evidence of this, of course, always being a lie, is the ClimateGate emails from just a few years ago. The ClimateGate emails were over 250 odd emails, all from the different climate scientists working through universities and other bodies from around the world, looking at all the same climate models and putting them together, trying to unify them to see what was really going on globally. Now, of course, inside of all those emails, the big smoking gun was that there was flat-out admission from these scientists to mess with the data, to turn it, to change it around so that it would suit their agenda, suit the globalist agenda, suit the United Nations agenda. Things such as the need to always have the hockey stick graph were talked about in these emails. Even things to do with global governance was talked about in these emails, and they go all the way back to the early 90s, before anybody in the general public was hearing about climate change or global warming or too much CO2 about to kill us all. These scientists were already planning out and enjoying the same conversations that then we had introduced to us late 90s, early 2000s. So that's how far back this goes, which clearly is a bit of even solid evidence right there as to how it can be so well planned and so well pulled off for as long as it was, because its planning stages go back 20 plus years ago. Beyond that, we also have, say, NASA's admission of saying last year, 2014, was the hottest year on record worldwide. But from scientists outside of NASA taking a look at those satellite images, taking a look at all of the climate models from 2014 and all the data, they went back to NASA and said, clearly there are many problems with what you are saying. Can you speak on that? NASA came back and said, well, actually, yes, because of all those variables you found, we do kind of know that there's only a 38% chance that 2014 was the hottest year on record, which is completely illogical, and NASA is supposed to be a group of some of the top scientists worldwide. What that is saying in a very surefire way, when you first came out the gate with it, that this has happened because there's a 38% chance of it. That is not science, that is illogical and nonsensical. Also, I will quickly add in the changing of the guards, the changing of the title from global warming to climate change. A clear admission that one was starting to be known too well and too highly regarded as falsified, as not occurring. So, you have to back off a little bit, hope to save face, and call it something a little bit lesser, the lesser evil, right? Climate change sounds friendly, doesn't sound so frightening as, global warming and the polar ice caps are melting. So that attempt as well too should verify quite easily for everybody just how much of a hoax this always has been. So, right there we have three big ones. The main one, what this report is mainly about, being that NASA has just recently admitted this year that all satellite images, all data from the past 30 plus years talking about global warming and specifically the receding of the polar ice caps is not true. The polar ice caps, neither north or south, are receding. They never have been dangerously. The ocean levels are fine and not rising at any sort of rapid pace. And therefore coastal cities are fine, etc., etc. All of that conversation can now be finally put to rest. I will, of course, add that when people talk about this, and this is what, the climate change religious followers have always, or the global warming religious followers, I should really say, have always used to push back against the anti-climate change people, which is really, we're the pro-science, the actual real science, actually being able to take a critical look at something and ask the tough questions, and if there isn't specific answers, then know that there's no conclusion there, that you're working off of a theory, which most things in science actually seem to be when you take a closer look at them. But of course, the people making all the money and need to continue making the money to continue doing the research that they're doing never want you to think of their work as a theory, because therefore there's too many questions and things can just start to fall away from them. So to maintain their very professional standpoint, they never want to speak of their sciences as a theory, and global warming is of course just another one. So we have tons of evidence that NASA and their ability to promote and converse about proper science has completely fallen to the wayside, which is horrible, but I guess a lot of you out there might already be very well aware of that. For those of you who aren't, go take a look at a lot more of the NASA controversies that surrounds them, and you're going to find a plethora. Lastly, I would also like to mention that now that we know this, and now that this has been admitted, even right across mainstream corporate news, we now need to really watch and make sure that anybody involved with the United Nations, all countries involved in the climate talks or at the United Nations, have to really better learn to start backing down off wanting to still set up this cap and trade, carbon credit, carbon tax system, which the Fortune 100 from this world, the big oil and such, who've even been a part sort of writing some of these climate change accordance with the United Nations to do with false scarcity and trying to basically just scare away and sink competition, are only going to be able to do so that much more effectively. If a Dutch Royal Shell or an Exxon has bought the lion's share of carbon credits away from a certain level of industry, then they're just going to come in and say, let's put it this way. If you're a smaller company and you're doing anything to do with fossil fuels and you're running out of carbon credits that's being dished out by some sort of global governance system and you're starting to run low on them and you have to be able to put out a certain amount of emissions to produce at the level that you produce at, well then guess what? One of the big boys like an Exxon, a Shell, they're just going to move in, they're going to pay your way. Now you're basically owned somewhat as part of subsidiary of theirs. They're handling their competition and big boys win, right? It's same old. It's absolute monopoly business. It's monopoly global governance industry. That is what the cap and trade system is aimed to be. So, to end this off, as I am wearing my What in the World Are They Spraying t-shirt, for me, this actually, knowing all this and having the cat totally out of the bag now, that global warming, climate change isn't true. It's not happening in the same way that, that we have always been told it has been from the power structure, from the more controlling elite body of this world. We still have to regard that there are changes occurring in our atmosphere. We have seen off-the-charts wild weather over the past decade. Record rainfalls, record snowfalls where they've never been seen before, freezing temperatures where they've never been seen before, boiling hot temperatures where they've never been seen before, super cold days followed by super warm days, etc., etc. Different, even what we see as more like even different kinds of skies, different forms of cloud cover, multiple different forms of cloud cover all at the same time, excessive amounts of lightning. I could go on and on and on. And this is just talking about simply just weather and the environment, never mind what's happening at the ground level as well too, which I've done other reports in. But when we start to take a look at all that, know that there still is large changes. And now that we know for sure, it's not all done by the burning of fossil fuels, which, by the way, I did want to mention earlier, I'm not saying that the continual running of, 5 billion cars and 1 million factories worldwide is a beautiful thing. No, of course, we still should always be looking to back off of things that are clearly a bit of a toxic or poisonous attribute to our surrounding world, to our ecosystems, absolutely. But still, because we know that the large part of any sort of adverse effects that we're seeing in our weather, in Earth's atmosphere right now, is not all coming from CO2 and the burning of fossil fuels. I think the very next thing in line to start looking at would be geoengineering and chemtrails. Man-made intervention into Earth's atmosphere. Something that we have scientists from around the world being paid just as much, if not more, than a lot of the global warming climate change alarmist scientists, getting paid to research all of this, bring forth all the kinds of models that are talking about the exact same things that we are now seeing worldwide in weather, in the atmosphere, and on the ground level. You can watch What and Why in the World Are They Spraying to learn more about that, and I'll link to both those films here. We need to be taking a closer look at this as being one of the major catalysts for actual causing any kind of massive warming, cooling, or wild weather that we're seeing. We know that militaries and governments have talked about messing around with the weather for decades upon decades. We are seeing a lot of those symptoms. We are seeing the exact same symptoms that geoengineers have said themselves might happen if they begin these kinds of things. So we absolutely need to be more honest and more forthright with proper science. And proper questions, and start to take a look at geoengineering and weather modification. So, I hope all of you are able to now clearly see that when we put all of these quick little points together, we clearly have a picture where a global governance system has been running very high and happy on this giant hoax of anthropogenic global warming and the polar ice caps are receding, and run scared screaming into the wind. And don't pay attention to those geoengineers over there that are talking just about as loud as the climate change guys. And don't listen to the oil companies that are still talking very heavily about cap and trade. Let's just continue to try to bathe ourselves in a lie. I hope you can see that that's been the whole show now, and that the cat is out of the bag. We can clearly see the lie for what it is. The emperor has no clothes, and let's now try to be a lot more honest with ourselves and with our world around us so that we can start to evolve the idea here and move on to what's really going on. Todd McDougall signing off from Winnipeg Alternative Media. Prairie Truth.